Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, ladies, gentlemen, and fellow Helldivers. This is your Democracy Officer speaking. Welcome back to another beginner-friendly 10-minute tutorial for Helldivers 2. Today, we'll be turning our attention to the Terminid swarm and how we can grind these blasted bugs straight into a barrel of the finest E710. This video will be divided into 3 sections: enemies, equipment, including stratagems, and playstyles, with timestamps available in the description below. Without further ado, let's dive right in. As Sun Tzu once said, know your enemy, know yourself, and in 100 battles you will never be defeated. Now, of course, Sun Tzu wouldn't have stood a chance against an 8-meter tall bug, but I think these words still apply. Our budding entomologists on Super Earth have categorized these pests into 3 rough categories according to their roles: melee, ranged, and heavy. This will be important when deciding on our weaponry later. Melee units are susceptible to almost all gunfire. In fact, Helldiver, your super fists are marked as lethal weapons, and if you wish to engage in democratic hand-to-hand combat with these beasties, you are certainly at liberty to do so. Just don't forget to bring a hefty dose of stims. For ranged enemies, such as the armoured bile spewer and the nursing spewer, we'll be fighting fire with fire using our own ranged splash weapons. And lastly, for heavily armoured enemies, we're going to need to call in the big guns, as their tough chitin eats lead for breakfast. When dealing with the Terminids, almost anything goes. As Super Earth likes to say, there's no one right way to skin a bug, which is why, instead of the usual weapon recommendations, I have divided all available in-game primaries, secondaries, and call-in stratagems into one of the 4 categories below to allow an easier loadout selection for our newer initiates. The categories are chaff clear, ranged single target, ranged medium splash, and the heavy delete button. Feel free to pause the video for a closer look, or click on the link in the description to access the interactive sheet. For the first portion of this section, we will be focusing on dealing with the general fodder, and thus will omit the heavy killer weapons. A few combinations of categories are possible: 1 and 2, 2 and 1, 1 and 3, and 3 and 1. Bringing a weapon capable of clearing chaff is critical when going against the Nids, as their #1 tactic is to Zerg rush our Helldivers and drown them in a tide of insectoid bodies. Hence, all recommended combinations include category 1 for some form of chaff clear. Once we've dealt with the swarm, our next concern is their ranged artillery, namely the dreaded spewers.
Warning, you are in range of enemy artillery.
This is where our own ranged arsenal comes in, with exploding weapons such as the crossbow, autocannon, and grenade launcher working especially well against these lumbering acid balloons. Just take note not to fire these in close quarters, and swap to your chaff clear instead, as their explosive payload is likely to take off your arm or your head. So that takes care of most types of Terminids, with the exception of Chargers and Titans. For these hulking behemoths, we're going to need heavier ordnance. And that's where the heavy killers come in. These optional call-in stratagems include the spear, recoilless rifle, railgun, etc., and may be considered for a more personal approach. However, should you find yourself already bristling with guns without room for a rocket or 2, fret not, for your super destroyer has you covered. Orbital rail cannons, precision strikes, and eagle rocket pods are all hands-free methods of killing these oversized roaches. Just note that their convenience comes at the cost of a longer cooldown, which means you might find yourself playing tag with the Titan for a couple of minutes while your munition officers reload the super destroyer's rail cannon.
Must go faster.
Once these basics have been met, feel free to fill any remaining stratagem slots with whatever form of ordnance or utility you so desire. Ever wanted to fly? Now you can take off in style with the Lift 850 jump pack. How about a 500 kilogram as a general purpose delete button? Or even a sentry to aid you in your crusade as it mows down friend and foe alike? The choice is yours. As for grenades, anyone will do, but here are some of my favourites and their uses. Are you tired of being run over by these living bulldozers? Grab a stun grenade to halt them in their tracks, or a thermite grenade to blow them to pieces. Gas grenades also work decently in a pinch, and momentarily blind enemies, allowing you to make a quick getaway. Just take note that the gas and stun grenades are incapable of taking down bug holes, so make sure you've got some other form of explosive on hand. And now for the final piece of the puzzle, body armor. When it comes to the bugs, light is right. Mobility is king, as staying 1 foot ahead of the swarm can mean the difference between life and death. Of course, with sufficient experience, any armor set will work. However, here are some attire recruits might find appealing. The CM21 Trench Paramedic. With its medkit passive, this armor allows you to stim your way out of any engagement. The CE7 Demolition Specialist. With its 2 additional grenades, you can now fulfill your dreams of becoming a human grenade launcher. And lastly, the SC30 Trailblazer Scout. Its scout passive reduces the range at which enemies can detect you by a whole 30%, and up to 61% if you're crouching. With this armor, you're practically John Cena. So that just about wraps up equipment, but we're not done just yet. Our final section is playstyles. Similar to the bots, it is highly inadvisable to shoot everything that moves, unless you're trying to reenact the last stand of Musashibo Benkei as you get impaled by a torrent of claws and jaws. That being said, if you're feeling the urge to exterminate something, the bugs are much more forgiving due to their preference for melee combat, and you should be able to clear a patrol or 2 single-handedly. When in doubt, just remember this helpful phrase: fire and fall back. Keep your finger on the trigger and back away from the swarm at a slow pace. The last thing we want to do is to yell Dragons! And charge headlong into the fray. As we pedal back, it is crucial to monitor our peripherals, as hunters and pouncers love to flank isolated Helldivers. Occasional checks to the rear are also recommended to avoid stumbling into another patrol or backing ourselves into a corner. Eventually, the seemingly unrelenting tide of bugs will exhaust itself, perishing upon the sword of Liber-Tea that is you, Helldiver. That is when we may press forward to our objective. But before we send you back to the front lines, here are some closing remarks and tips. The best way to deal with a charger, should the terrain permit, is to take cover behind the closest rock or outcrop so that it smashes its head into the terrain, gifting you with an easy shot using your heavy killing weapons. As for stalkers, if you're feeling like a marksman, aim for their head. While admittedly difficult to hit, those small craniums only pack 175 health, and scoring a direct hit could flatline the beast instantly. Finally, if you're using an infernal loadout and accidentally set yourself ablaze, simply stop, drop, and dive to put out the flames. And with that, it's back into the action for you, bold Helldiver, and may Liber-Tea guide your swift extraction.